folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. So today I want to talk about how to survive food shortages. We've talked about the potential for food shortages for a while, and if at the very least, and this is like best case scenario, at least we're going to experience what we've already been experiencing, and it's going to get worse, and that is high food prices. Food prices higher than you've probably ever experienced, along with the fact that inflation keeps going up, so everything you're buying is more expensive. It's not just the fact that your food is more expensive, everything is. So the purchasing power of your money is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And that's really the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is that there are very real food shortages here in America. There's definitely going to be an elsewhere on this planet. But here in America, it's quite possible that we could experience real food shortages. Shortages that there just isn't enough food of a particular type to go around. I think we will see at least food shortage when it comes to economic food shortages, meaning that grocery stores just choose to not stock certain items because the price has become so expensive, people can't afford it. And they don't want to risk having a bunch of stock on the shelves that they can't move. So in that sense, we'll probably see food shortages. But we could see some real food shortages in this country. And so we have to start making plans now to deal with it. Many of you, like myself, have been working on this for a long time. Some of you are just getting started. But either way, there's still things that we can do right now to become food independent. And that's really the big thing. That's what our goal is. Because like I've said on here many times before, this big plan that we all know is going on with the globalists and all these banking cartel and the technocrats and all that kind of stuff to kind of control us all, well, it's only going to work if we're dependent upon them. If we build our world, our own little life around the fact that we are independent and connect it with others like us, building communities, in real world communities, tribes of people that are really independent of the system, free of those systems, then they really don't have control over us in the way that they want to. So building an independence within your own home and your family, your homestead, is really critical in many, many ways. And so what are you going to do about food? I mean, have you really thought about that? Have you made a plan? And so I want to give you some tips along the way to help you get going. Some of these are for the beginner, and some of this may be for a little bit more the advanced. So stick with it, and hopefully it'll be something that you can learn a little bit and help you along the way. I want to show you a t-shirt. I am not a t-shirt designer, but I've been playing around with one because I had this idea for a t-shirt, for a slogan. It's actually a quote in history, and I couldn't find one that had exactly what I wanted. I found a lot that the part of the quote was on it, but there was something that was missing from all of them. So I decided to make up my own, and I ordered just a couple just to see what they look like. And it's still probably still being worked on. I thought I would show it to you. I do have a Teespring account connected to this channel, and if this is something that some of you are interested in, I can put it on there and I'll figure out a price. It'll be much lower than the suggested price of it. The thing that I've not seen with this quote is this part. It is its natural manure. And for me, this Tree of Liberty quote, that's a very important part of it. The Tree of Liberty must be refreshed from time to time by the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure, okay? That is how a tree of liberty survives. And so if any of you, just let me know what you think. Does this need to be tweaked? I mean, you can tell I'm obviously no t-shirt graphic designer. It's pretty basic and simple, but I kind of like the basic and simple. Some of these, I think a lot of these t-shirts that are going around, that they're kind of cool, I'll admit, but they're just a lot going on. They're really busy. And I kind of like the basic, simple stuff. Anyways, let me know what you think. You can go ahead and laugh at it if you want. I've got really thick skin. No snowflake here. So anyways, let's get on with some ideas on how to survive the coming food shortages. Well, of course, the obvious answer is to stock up on food. You know, even like I said just a minute ago, even in the best case scenario, food is going to get expensive. So if nothing else, you're saving money, or really you're investing money in food that you're going to pay less for now than what you will pay would pay at the time that you're going to eat it. So if you went and you purchased, if you invested in enough money right now to purchase a year's worth of food, when you get to the year end of that, the end of the year of eating that food that you're eating, you paid a lot less for than if you had gone out at that time a year later and purchased food. So you're saving money. If you have bought food, some of the food that you have on the shelves that may be a year, 2, 3 years old, you paid a lot less for that food than if you went out and purchased it right now. So at the very least, stocking up on food is really an investment that, especially right now, is going to have a guaranteed return. I guarantee you, if you went out and you purchased a year's worth of oatmeal, let's say, a year from now, when you're eating the last of that oatmeal, the oatmeal that you're eating, you will have paid a lot less for than what the current price at that time is going to be for oatmeal, meaning that you have saved yourself money. That's putting money in your pocket. So that's the best case scenario. But getting to where you have a food supply is very important. 60 to 90 days is really kind of a beginner goal for you. I hope that most of you can come up with at least 60 to 90 days. That's really important. I think a long-term goal is to shoot for 2 years. And the reason why I say 2 years, I've said this so many times, but I'm going to repeat it again. The reason why I say that you should have a 2-year food supply is because if the society around us completely collapses, if the economy completely collapses, if the food supply chain completely collapses, meaning that you have no guarantee that you can get food outside of your own little environment, and to the point that you know that from that point on, you're probably going to only eat the stuff that you raise, that you produce. Having a 2-year food supply gives you a 2-year transition period to get to where you're only living off of what you produce, okay? So if something were to happen and it throws us back to the Stone Age or whatever, and we have to live solely off of what we produce, having a 2-year food supply gives you a 2-year buffer, at least a 2-year buffer, to transition into completely living out of your garden and off the wild and off the livestock that you raise. And it's going to take you a lot longer than you think. So 2 years is like a minimum for that transition. So that's to me, that's a goal. I used to tell people to go out when you go grocery shopping, buy a few extra things and put them back. You need to be doing more than just buying a few extra. You need to be pushing yourself to buy a lot more. And then your pantry is not something that you put your food away and you never look at it. It doesn't work that way. Your pantry is something that you live out of, okay? You grocery shop out of your pantry. When my wife or sometimes I cook, we don't, we're not going to the grocery store, or we're not going to like just the short term, cabinets and stuff. I mean, there are a few things that don't have a long shelf life, but most things that we're shopping or that we're cooking, we're going to our pantry, our prepper pantry, and we're shopping out of that. And then when we go grocery shopping, that food directly goes to our prepper pantry and it's replenishing it because we've built up to that level. And that's a goal that you should work for. And so that you're constantly eating out of your prepper pantry, and it keeps the stuff, new. And, most of the stuff that we have at most is 2 years old because we're constantly eating out of it and constantly replenishing it. It's not like you have stuff that's, 30 years old. I mean, we do have like the dry goods. We do have a long-term supply of dry goods, but most stuff like canned foods and stuff, hardly any of it's older than 2 years because we're constantly eating from it and adding to it. And so that's something that you need to do. Most dry goods will store 20 years if properly stored. Some will store much longer than that, 30, 40 years. But most dry goods, your oatmeal, your beans, your rice, your wheat, your dry hard pastas, things like that, most of them will store, and other grains, your grains and your beans, will store at least 20 years if properly stored. The two important things when properly storing them is that you're keeping them in a temperate temperature. The temperature is in a good even range. Somewhere between 50 and 70 degrees is usually good. 70 is starting to get a little high, but that 50 to 60 degree range is really good for most things. Some things it's better to keep them cooler, but this is most. And then you want to keep them free from sunlight. That's something that also degrades things. Other than that, you want to keep them dry, and you want to keep them bug and rodent free. And if you do that for your dry goods, you're going to have them last a long time. We do put our stuff in Mylar, vacuum sealed Mylar bags, and store them in plastic buckets. The plastic buckets helps prevent, pests, mice, things like that from getting into them. And of course, we have other measures to keep that down too. So we have multiple layers of protection on our food, and that's something you need to do. And then you need to work on your canned foods. Most people are pretty well aware of canned foods. I mean, that's a great prepper food. Most canned foods will last at least 3 to 5 years on the shelf. Of course, they can last longer than that. But at minimum 3 to 5 years, usually your canned meats like your tunas and salmon and things like that, and even some of your canned meats can last even longer than the vegetables. But again, you don't want them to get too hot. You don't want them to freeze. You want to keep them in a good kind of steady temperature. The pop open cans, you've seen that a lot, like a can of green beans that you don't need a can opener, you just pop it open. They may not last as long because of how they pop open. That's a weak point, and it is possible that it can lose its seal in those. So be careful with those. I'm not saying not get them. You just have to be careful that they don't get banged around and they don't get too hot or too cold, because that's a weak spot on the can, and they can lose their seal pretty easy. Right now, cooking oil is something you should be stocking up on. And that's something that we've stocked up on quite a bit in the last year. Is cooking oil. Right now, we're seeing a real shortage of cooking oil. Ukraine produces like half of the world's sunflower seed oil. Indonesia has cut off their palm oil exports. We're seeing other oils that are being cut off around the world or greatly reduced. And so right now there's a real cooking oil shortage, and cooking oil is very important. So I would get pretty serious about stocking up on cooking oil. Now, this little chart here, it shows an average shelf life of cooking oils. Cooking oils don't have a really long shelf life, okay? And if you see that, I would advise you on choosing a cooking oil, the ones that you're going to stock up on, that has a longer shelf life. Of course, you want to make sure it's a healthy one. Some of these cooking oils aren't really that healthy. But you want something that's got a longer shelf life. And now these shelf lives can be extended if you're able to store them in a refrigerator. If you keep them cold and out of the sunlight, they will last much longer. Not extensively longer, but you can usually at least double the shelf life if they stay sealed up in the original container in a refrigerator where there's no light on them. They will last a lot longer. And then other than that, focus on spices and salts, things to season your food. These are really the basics of your food. That's the basics. Now, the big thing is we want to focus on growing our own food, growing, producing, and then preserving our own food. So in growing your own food, gardening, of course, we talk about that. You need to have seeds, and you need to have the tools to do that. There is a book that many of you could benefit from. There's others that are like this, so I'm not just promoting this book. I'm just saying it's one that I have personally read, and it's a good one. And that's this one. You can see the book's it's in kind of rough shape because it's been well used by us. Now, this book focuses on quarter-acre gardening. The focus is on, like an urban garden in your city lot. And even though we have much more than quarter acre, there's some good information in here. Talks about how you can, produce 1,400 eggs on a quarter acre, 50 pounds of wheat, 60 pounds of fruit, 2,000 pounds of vegetables, 280 pounds of pork, 75 pounds of nuts, all on a quarter acre. You have to be creative, but you can do that. I understand the laws are whoop. I think I just bumped my camera, and I apologize for that. I understand the laws are going to vary. Some of you aren't. It's going to be difficult. Some of you, you can only work in the backyard. You have to get a little creative in the front yard. You also have to think that if times get worse, how much are the local cities really going to enforce those laws? I don't know. But certainly a book that book or a book like that can greatly help you in producing food, because whether you live way out in the middle of nowhere and you have lots of acreage, or you live in a town, you can produce food, okay? Even in an apartment, with container gardening, you can produce food. And if you absolutely can't because of, space, you need to be looking around at community gardens. And I've heard of people finding people that have like vacant lots, and they work out a deal with them. Hey, if you let me grow a garden on your vacant lot, I'll split the food with you. That kind of stuff really does happen, and I would seriously look into that. And then, of course, meat. I know some of you aren't meat eaters, so I guess you don't have to listen to this. But things like chicken, goats, sheep, pork, if you eat that, can all be raised. But out of all the things that can be raised for food, your ducks, your rabbits, and your quail require the least food, and get the least amount of work to get it to butcher weight. So if you're looking at poultry, a chicken will get to butcher weight faster. A duck. Excuse me. A duck will get to butcher weight faster than chicken. Now, yes, you can buy those meat-only bird-type chickens, but they're not sustainable because they're nearly impossible to raise, to hatch out an egg, to get an egg and to hatch them out. You have to constantly be going every time you want to raise them to a hatchery and buying chicks. So you want to have a sustainable way to produce meat where you're doing it all on your own. And a normal regular chicken, even a dual purpose chicken, usually takes about 5 months to get to its butcher weight, whereas a duck only takes about 8 weeks. So it's a lot less time. So you're spending less time and less food to get that duck to a butcher weight. And so ducks they grow a lot faster. The same way with quail. Quail grow and they get to their butcher weight much faster than chickens. And then so do rabbits, for those of you that eat a rabbit. They get to their butcher weight faster. So if you're looking from an economical perspective, those three animals work great. And most of those three you can grow in a backyard. I mean, you can raise a lot of meat from quail in your backyard, or from rabbit in your backyard, or from ducks in your backyard. You need to research the right breed that works for your area, but you most certainly can do it, and I would strongly encourage you to do that. Another thing to think about, especially when you're raising animals, how much does it cost to raise the animal versus how much does it cost for your own food? And as things get worse and as things get more expensive, it's going to get more expensive to feed you because human food's more expensive. Whereas the food to feed your animals, while it's going to increase in price, it's still going to be cheaper than it is to feed you. So it might be better if you get a system up and going to where you can produce enough food to sustain you, because becoming meat independent is actually pretty easy. If you have the land, the equipment to process it, to butcher it, to process the meat all the way through, whether you're freezing it, canning it, or smoking it, once you have that all in place, it's not too hard to create a pretty good system to where you can become meat independent. And if you're doing that, it might be better to spend more of your grocery money on producing meat than to take that grocery money and buy food for yourself. I think the dollar per calorie difference is much better if you're taking that, so for $200 a month, $200 a month in human food anymore isn't going to buy a whole lot. And in the future, it's going to buy a lot less. But $200 in buying grain, you can buy a lot of grain, and you can actually sustain some small livestock on $200 a month in grain. And then how much meat do you get at the end when that's ready to butcher? So you need to think along those kind of terms. We live now in a different world than any of you have ever experienced. And that is going to continually change. And within the next year or two, there's a very strong, very real possibility that the world that we will live in at that point will be so vastly different than anything we've ever experienced. So we need to start thinking about this real survival and sustainability when it comes to our food. Stocking food is an excellent idea. You should be doing that. But you should be putting a lot of focus in learning, developing the skills, because it's not easy to grow food and to raise food. You have to know what you're doing. You certainly don't want to go out and buy a bunch of animals and then not know how to take care of them. And you don't want to waste all your time in a garden if you don't know what you're doing. So you need to develop those skills to really learn about it and develop the infrastructure around to take care of them, and how to not just raise them up, but to actually butcher them, process them, or harvest it and process it and preserve it, so that you can have it for long term. This is the world that I think that we're headed to. And you can't do it and continually depend on an outside system, because there's no guarantee how long those outside systems are going to be there. You need to work on survival level food independence. Not just doing it for a hobby or just because it's a little healthier, but to do it because you are surviving off of it, and think along those terms. And if you do that, I think it's going to greatly benefit you and get you further down the road of food independence and real sustainability in the world that we're living in now, and how it's becoming. All right, folks, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.